I'm Bets McNie with the Western Water Assessment, a RESA program. And I want to talk to you today about a project that was funded by Kylie that I did with Adam Paris and Dan Sarowitz to develop a typology. Actually, I don't know if that was the mission was to develop the typology, but the typology emerged as a result of the mission that helps us to design, deliberate, implement, and evaluate research. And one of the charges for this talk was to spend 3 minutes talking about the problem. Instead, I want to talk about the problem in 25 phrases. So I'll just go through these. Ad hoc, applied, background, Baconian, basic, clinical, committed, curiosity-driven, curiosity-oriented, development, directed, experimental, free basic, fundamental, Jeffersonian, mode 1, mission-oriented, Newtonian, normal, oriented basic, pure, pure basic, purposive basic, strategic, tactical, translational, uncommitted, and use-inspired. Well, that's a different list. Yeah. So this is a list of 25 phrases that we found in the process of our research that basically describes in broad terms what are basic and applied research. Now, basic and applied research is defined primarily by the motivation for the research and the temporal delay to application. And all of the phrases that I just mentioned are pretty much along the same lines. And what they share, along with basic and applied, is the lack of identification of the role of the user in the research process. And this is really important because what we're talking about in terms of, science policy interactions is doing this in order to solve problems. And in order to solve problems, we have to have a sense of what the user's needs are. So in order to get a better idea of how to address users' needs and the role of research and how to shape it and implement it, et cetera, we developed this typology. So a couple of the shortcomings of basic and applied paradigm is that it fails to address the stakeholder involvement, and that it also, really importantly, limits the comparisons of science and policy processes. So for example, all of these 25 phrases don't really give us an idea of how to shape research, of how to implement it, of how to design it, except for these two factors, motivation for research and temporal delay to application. Basic and applied research and these other 25 are also detached from users' needs and values and fails to address the challenges of the problem-solving work itself. So what we have to do is have a new thinking about how we do research. Some of those, as Ryan just mentioned, might be post-normal, mode 2, transdisciplinary, action-oriented research, participatory research, and others. So we do have a sense of what we need to do to get there, but even these more recent types of research that I just mentioned lack explicit directions, if you will, about how to design, deliberate, implement, and evaluate research. So what we developed was a typology through an extensive literature review and then inductive reasoning, in which we developed or identified 3 primary activities of research, and then within each activity, 5 particular attributes of that activity. And then each attribute is further clarified along a spectrum. So let me give you, name the 3 activities first. One is knowledge production. Obviously, that's a key role of research and is our first activity. The second one is learning and engagement. And the third one is organizational and institutional processes. And so we feel that with these 3 activities, we do a pretty good job of describing research, overall. Within the knowledge production category, we have as an attribute expertise. So the spectrum here, the question is, what kind of expertise? Is it formal expertise, the kind that comes through getting a PhD, or is it experiential expertise, the kind that comes from, spending your lifetime on the farm or in the factory, or with your particular medical ailment? Another attribute of knowledge production might be disciplinary focus. Is the focus of the research singular? Is it a single discipline, a couple of disciplines, or is it multidisciplinary in its focus? Another attribute of knowledge production might be uncertainty. Is the goal of uncertainty to reduce it, as it is with many problems, or is the goal to manage uncertainty, as it is with more complex coupled human environmental problems? For learning and engagement, our second activity, some of the attributes include learning. Is the goal of learning here more theoretical, contributing to theory, or is it more practical, solutions-oriented? Thank you. Another attribute is knowledge exchange. Is it unidirectional from science to society, for example, as with typical science communication, one way? Or is it multidirectional, in which case, the communication flows between and among users and researchers, et cetera, in an iterative and ongoing process? Another one is network participation. Is it homogeneous, where you are working alone or within a single network of like-minded individuals, or is it more heterogeneous? And finally, with social capital. Does the social capital that is so important for lubricating these processes, does it reside primarily within science, or is it also outside of science? And our third category or activity is organizational and institutional processes. And I'll just go through a couple of these really quickly. One is accessibility. How accessible are the researchers and the research project? Do they live in the ivory tower separated by institutes and centers and colleges and universities? Or is accessibility rather high, like what you might find within an extension service? Are outputs narrow, in which case we might just see peer-reviewed publications, patents, or are outputs more diverse, which might include educational trainings, workshops, et cetera? And finally, boundary management. How important is it to manage that boundary between science and policy? Is it low? If you're working with a bunch of astrophysicists studying the former planet Pluto, it may not be that important. But if you're working in the science policy interface, it's high. So what do we do with this? Well, we've implemented this survey to 3 groups so far and have them map their own research agendas and provided what we call a thumbprint. So a sense of what their research looks like, with the idea that it can then help deliberate, design, and help them implement their research. These first 3 trials have been, the first 2 anyway, have really been geared towards refining the survey instrument and the language. And now we're on the verge of implementing a survey to multiple departments across campus at University of Colorado Boulder to get a better idea of what research looks like. But what is interesting so far, and Adam can probably comment on this too, because we did this with his institute, was that so far, regardless of where researchers are in terms of our professional judgment, where they might be towards the right side of the spectrum or towards the left side of the spectrum, most of the answers cluster somewhere in the middle to the right side. So one of the goals of administering this to more departments is to get a better idea of how people view their research in departments that are traditionally what we would call more basic research, like physics. So anyway, that was the project, and we feel optimistic that this particular typology can be really useful in designing research, especially when we're thinking about meeting users' needs and solving practical problems. It gives us a language to use to talk about research, which is thumbprint of the research itself.
Great. Thank you. Any clarifying questions or follow-ups here? No? I just... Okay. Did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I just missed. Who are the three groups that it was given to?
We gave it to Adam's research group, and then another research group doing drought research on the Wind River Indian Reservation in Wyoming, and then also a research group within University of Colorado Boulder. Yeah. So we were trying to collect as many. We collected as many as we could, and then averaged them to create sort of an average thumbprint of that particular project, whether by social scientists or by physical scientists, et cetera. We were evaluating projects, except for Adam, we did a program.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is, well, two things. First, to develop the typology, we engaged program managers, largely federal program managers, although we had a professor and a clinical professor from a teaching hospital, but we had federal program managers including outside of the climate arena, across multiple agencies who manage big portfolios. Second thing I would add is, for the results of the survey on our institute, it was pretty clear that when researchers had to answer a question, because this was part of a larger survey about how well they communicated to and worked with policy and decision makers, they rated themselves very high. And then when they got to the typology and they answered these questions in the learning and engagement, their answers didn't line up.
Surprise, surprise, surprise. Yes, Maria.
So do you feel that this typology would be useful for international teams?
Yeah, I think it would be very useful, because one of the things that it can do is illuminate differences between cultures of research. And I think that once you identify, so we recently held a workshop on usable science at CU Boulder, and two people who were part of the same research team came up with very different answers in a couple of the key areas.
Okay.
And that was the genesis for a long conversation between the two of them about what they were doing. And they decided that their different approaches were appropriate, but it gave them time to really think about and deliberate whether they were doing the right thing. So I think, it's really taking a thumbprint of a culture, a research culture.
Would you like some guinea pigs?
I would love it. That would be great.
No, I was just thinking of the Belmont Forum. We have a PI meeting coming up at AGU, and we're looking at evaluating team building and transdisciplinarity and all of these things. So we have a workshop. So if you are willing, I would love to have you come.
Let's talk. That
Okay,
would be great.
Perfect, because there's 13 projects.
Great. Wow. Okay. I've got some Xeroxing to do.